Welcome to Grandpa is Him, a fun microcast about everything and nothing in ordinary life. I am your host, Lynn Dimmick, and if I'm your host, then you're my guest, and I hope that you will enjoy this time that you spend with me. In this episode, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, or AI. And because we talk about everything and nothing in everyday life, I'm going to share with you some of the behind the scenes, or the meta portions of a podcast. And by the time we're done with this episode, you're going to understand why this is called Grandpa is Him and not Grandpa ChatGPT. Now, one of the tools that I use to create a podcast is artificial intelligence, in this case, ChatGPT. And what I use it for is that I ask it to help me come up with some ideas. For example, I have family members that play Dungeons & Dragons, as we heard about in the last episode. And so I'll use ChatGPT to generate questions that might trigger some thoughts or some ideas and to try and keep the conversation in a certain light and flowing in a certain pattern. Now, I know that ChatGPT has some limitations. For instance, they stopped the initial training in 2022. That means that there are holes in what it knows. However, they have recently started training up again, and so it has some more current information. I've always considered ChatGPT to be nothing more than a smart search engine that can find data for me across the internet, aggregate it, and present it in a human format. Once I have an idea or a theme for a show and some basic questions, I will go through and use ChatGPT to do some research so that I'm informed of the topic, or to look for anything in particular that I can add to the topic and make it a little bit more interesting and add to the conversation. When I get done recording an episode, I transfer the files, the audio recordings, to my computer. I then go through and I try and find places where there's too big of a gaps, or there's things that need to be taken out, replaced, or re-recorded. Once I have a solid working version, I will extract the files, upload them to a website that uses AI. And what it does is it receives my file and then creates a text message or a transcript of it. Now I can go through and I can make additional changes and corrections, remove any gaps, things like that. I can even change and remove some of the text. I go through and I put it back into my computer. I finish up the final editing. I add the music and upload it one final time to a website where it uses AI to remove any of the hisses and pops and things like that in the audio that are not good. And it creates the show notes. Now, the show notes are things like little brief excerpts of different sections. It identifies where the chapters are. In some cases, I can even have it insert within the document a live bookmark, which allows you to go to that specific spot in the podcast and start listening from that point forward. Now, my purpose in sharing this with you is to show that I do use a lot of AI tools, but they're tools to try and make this presentation better sounding, a little bit more solid, and to make better use of my time. So armed with that information, let's move forward. Today, I'm joined by someone who has a lot of knowledge on a variety of topics, Max Foster. We're going to have a discussion about how technology is changing our lives, some of the big questions around AI, and much more. Max, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. AI is such a cool topic, and I'm really excited to chat about how it's changing things in our day-to-day lives.
Max, let's start with the basics. What exactly is AI, and how is it different from other technology that we use today?
AI is basically when machines or systems try to act like humans, learning, thinking, and solving problems. Unlike regular software that just follows preset instructions, AI can learn from experience and make decisions that get smarter over time.
So, where are we seeing AI being used today? Are there any places people might be surprised to learn AI is involved? What are some examples?
AI is pretty much everywhere these days. It's in our phones, cars, and all the gadgets we use every day. It's what makes virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa work. It's used to give us those spot-on Netflix and Spotify recommendations. It even helps doctors with better diagnoses and treatment plans.
Okay, those are some of the places AI is being used, but in what ways is it changing things and benefiting society?
AI is changing the way that we do things in areas like healthcare, education, and even saving the environment. In healthcare, it's helping doctors catch problems early, and in education, it's making learning more personal. Plus, AI is being used to make renewable energy more efficient and fight climate change.
Okay, AI is clearly transforming many fields, and you touched upon education. My wife is a teacher, so this is a particular topic of interest for me. In what ways are schools using AI today, both for teaching and for the students?
In schools, AI is helping to make learning more personalized. There are platforms that adjust lesson difficulty based on how students are doing so they can move at their own speed. It's also a big help to teachers by taking care of tasks like grading, giving them more time to actually focus on teaching.
Years ago, my wife would be grading homework, and she would say, "This child copied this from somewhere," and she would ask me to use some research tools to go find out where the original source was. While this sounds good, isn't it possible that this is creating a risk that the students might become too dependent on AI to learn and solve problems?
That's a fair concern. AI can definitely help with learning by giving personalized feedback, but there's a sweet spot. If students rely too much on AI without really understanding the material, it might hold them back. But when used as a tool to support learning, AI can actually push students to think more critically by giving them helpful insights in real time.
One of the issues that I hear about once in a while, and I kind of alluded to it in my question, is the idea that students are using AI to complete assignments or cheat, like having AI write an essay for them. How big of a problem is this, and what can schools do to address it?
AI tools like ChatGPT can definitely be used to write essays or answer homework questions, which has some people worried about cheating. Schools are stepping up by teaching students how to use AI responsibly and focusing more on critical thinking and original work. Plus, there are tools being created to help teachers spot when something might have been written by AI.
But isn't this kind of a self-perpetuating problem, and that AI learns how to defeat these tools? Is it really possible to detect when an assignment has been written by AI? How reliable are those tools?
Detecting AI-generated content is doable, but it's not always 100% reliable. Tools can scan things like text patterns and grammar to spot AI-written stuff, but as AI gets smarter, it's trickier to catch. That's why teachers need to stay connected with how their students write and grow, instead of just depending on detection software.
Let's continue on with this topic of the kids. Kids today are growing up surrounded by AI, from games to learning apps, which we discussed about within the schools. How much AI are they being exposed to? And is this something that parents need to be concerned about?
Kids are interacting with AI way more than we might think. Take video games, for example. AI adjusts the game based on how they play, making things more exciting. And in educational apps, AI tweaks lessons to match their learning style. While these tools can be super helpful, it's still important for parents to keep an eye on how much they're using them and make sure they're balancing screen time with real-world activities.
Well, Max, it looks like we're about out of time for this segment. I want to thank you for stopping by to talk about AI. And unfortunately, I think we've only just barely scratched the surface of this topic. So I'm sure we'll hear more from you later.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. AI is definitely something we'll all be talking about more in the years to come.
Grandpa said that I could have a pony if I said Grandpa is him.
Thank you, Caleb. Now, go tell your mom that Grandpa said that you can have your pony. As I'm sure most of you have figured out by now, that interview with Max was not with a real person. Max was an AI-generated figment of my imagination, and the entire conversation, with a little bit of ad-libbing on my questions, was entirely AI-generated. My point was to give you an idea of how pervasive AI is, how it's impacting our lives, and most importantly, how is it affecting our children's lives, because they're the ones growing up with it. Let me spend a few minutes explaining what I did in this for this little charade. I used a program called ChatGPT, and what you do is you type something into ChatGPT, you give it some parameters. This is called a prompt. The initial prompt that I used said, I want to create a 25 to 30 minute interview with me as the host and you as the guest. The topic will be artificial intelligence. I want to touch on where it is used, how it benefits society, what kind of apps use it, how much we and our children are exposed to it. So I need you to help me think of questions and then build a script. Do you understand? The answers that it came back with sounded a little bit stilted and formal. So I took each answer that it gave me and I re-input it back into the system and I said, can you please make this sound a little bit more relaxed conversationally? I took the answers that it gave me and I cut and paste those into another AI app that takes the text and converts it into a voice. So if you notice on the voice, there was not as much inflection, particularly at the intro when they said that they were excited to be there and that it was an exciting topic. I didn't hear much inflection in there. The other thing you'll notice is that the answers were never very definite. They were in generalities. And that's one of the clues that you're dealing with an AI device or an AI system, is that the answers are not always very specific and they don't want to get into anything controversial. I have also found places where the AI is wrong. And part of that's because they were being taught off of bad links or faulty information. It's the old principle of garbage in, garbage out. The other thing to be aware of is that AI is not going to be up to date. Right now, ChatGPT quit training in 2022. So that means that anything that has happened or has been written or recorded on the internet is not included in the data that you're working with. For example, if I asked ChatGPT who the best player in baseball was for 2024, it could not answer because it only has data through 2022. If you ask it for the impact of certain rule changes within sports, such as when they made the bases bigger in baseball, it cannot answer that question because it doesn't have any empirical data to fall back on it to do the analysis for. However, you can input some of that information. It can do the analysis. The other thing you need to be particularly careful about is that it's very selective in how it's finding the sources for information. For instance, if you have some information that's been updated recently and you try and ask a question based upon it and it doesn't know about it, it's not going to include that. What that means is that if there's been a new archaeological discovery or a change in the way that carbon dating is being done, then they will not have an answer that reflects that change, so your answer will be incorrect. Again, garbage in, garbage out. ChatGPT, and I assume that the other AI models, are not trying to create controversy. They are trying to act conversationally. One of the points that I tried to get ChatGPT to come in on was the idea of being able to cheat using ChatGPT and the system not being able to detect it. It's kind of a circular problem because if I ask ChatGPT to write an essay for me in school, it's going to produce one. If that is detected, I can feed it back into ChatGPT and ask it to regenerate it in such a way that it will not be detected. However, at the same time, ChatGPT is trying to learn how to identify that. And so now you get this endless loop of cheating and trying not to cheat. The other thing is that part of the prompt is that I can ask it to do things in different styles. And let me give you an example of that. Here's a classic nursery rhyme about Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. If I change the prompt to say, please restate this rhyme with the vocabulary of a 12-year-old, it produces, Humpty Dumpty was chilling on a wall. Then he took a big tumble and had a rough fall. All the king's horses and all the king's crew couldn't fix Humpty no matter what they tried to do. For this next example, I asked ChatGPT to please rewrite it in the style of a doctoral thesis. It says, title, An Examination of the Fall of Humpty Dumpty, a Case Study in Fragility and Restoration. Abstract. This thesis explores the narrative surrounding the character Humpty Dumpty, focusing on his precarious position atop a wall and the subsequent consequences of his fall. Despite the valiant efforts of the king's horses and men, the text highlights the limitations of restorative capabilities in the face of structural failure. Introduction. The Tale of Humpty Dumpty, a seemingly simple nursery rhyme, provides profound insights into the themes of fragility, the nature of accidents, and the challenges inherent in the restoration of broken entities. The central event, the character's fall from an elevated position, serves as a critical point of analysis for determining the implications of vulnerability in both literal and metaphorical contexts. I did decide to add another section just to make sure that we had a little bit of fun. So I used the AI, not just for the text, but for the voice. Enjoy.
Okay, folks, let me tell you about this guy, Humpty Dumpty. He was up on a wall, big wall, beautiful wall, just sitting there really. But then, folks, he took a tremendous fall. Nobody saw it coming, believe me. Now all the king's horses and all the king's men, tremendous guys, great guys, tried to put Humpty back together again. Not a chance. It was tough, folks. So remember, it's all about staying off the wall. You don't want to be Humpty, folks. You want to stay safe, stay strong, and stay together.
I then asked Penny, Blake, and Luke for their feedback on how it sounded. Because that conversation was all online on our phones, I had to take what they said, feed it through AI, assign a voice to it, and play it back here. So what you're hearing is their response, but not their voice. They actually thought that was pretty cool.
Penny, cool. Did anyone else realize that they rhyme never said Humpty Dumpty was an egg?
Blake, it sounds very AI.
Then I said, it does, but it was just for fun. I showed 3 other ways that AI can be used to change how the saying goes depending upon who is telling it. I'll see if I can upload the 12-year-old version.
Luke, this sucks.
It's good.
I like it.
I told them what I did, and you need to hear the podcast, is give different examples of AI versions of Humpty Dumpty. Then I asked them, does it suck because of the sound or because it is Trump? To which Luke replied, both.
No.
I like it.
Me too.
I wanted them to be a little bit more positive, so I said, actually, the fact that you know who it is shows it is very good.
It said Trump in the name.
I don't like Trump, but I like the recording. I think it's cool.
Okay.
It's bad. I don't like everything, but you should make it to where you say everything because that would be a lot better.
At this point, I uploaded the 12-year-old version and asked them, okay, how about this one? And after a few moments, the feedback started pouring in. I knew I was in trouble because I knew I was going to need a translator.
Nah, it would say, but they weren't skibidi enough.
That comment was met with a round of LOLs.
Trust me, I know enough 12-year-olds.
Huh? By now, I know I'm in way over my head, but there's no way I'm going to tell them that. So my only reply was, LOL, Ohio. Right about now, my wife is starting to lean over and look at my phone because her phone was getting so many messages that it literally froze up and could not receive a single message. She says, what are you doing? What are you talking about? What is Ohio? I told her, I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to go with it. Then I asked Skibbity. I need Roz to translate.
Actually, it would probably say they were too Ohio.
Or weren't Sigma enough.
Sigma? What is he talking about? I know all about Six Sigma. This has nothing to do with it.
It would say they didn't have enough Riz.
I love how stupid these are.
Finally, a word I can understand.
Okay.
Penny then piped in, IKR.
He got phantom taxed and fell from the wall.
What does IKR stand for?
3 blown mind emojis.
And so now I've invited the mistress of social media, 15-year-old Rosalind. Roz, can you please translate what the heck was just said and explain what these terms mean? The first word that they used was skibbity. What does skibbity mean?
Skibbity is like Skibbity Toilet, which is like a YouTube channel.
Yeah. What does it mean?
It's like it can differ.
So it's random?
It can be like a good thing if you're Skibbity, but it could also mean like a bad thing.
Okay. What about Ohio?
People say a lot of weird and random stuff happens in Ohio.
Really?
So, yeah.
I've been there and I didn't see that. All right. What about Sigma? What does Sigma mean?
Sigma is like good. Like if you're Sigma, that means it's like a compliment.
What about Riz? What's Riz?
Riz is like how much game you got, I guess. So if you say you have a lot of Riz, that means like a lot of people fall for you.
So it's kind of like charisma, like short for charisma?
Kinda, yeah.
Okay. All right. Now the last one was really random. Phantom text.
Phantom tax is a streamer. I actually don't really know what it means to get phantom tax, but I know.
All right. So
like who it is.
What's a streamer?
A streamer is someone that records a video and people can see it live while they're recording.
Okay. It was a really random conversation.
Yeah.
And that little transition music is a piece called Battle with the Circus Freaks, which I think is absolutely appropriate. As I mentioned, this was actually going to be 4 different podcasts. The first one being the AI interview, where I let it answer the questions that I asked it. The second one was going to be an investigative reporting piece that involved Brett Favre and the Mississippi welfare scandal. The third one was going to be a Lego heist from when their warehouse was robbed in the year 2000. And the fourth one I was looking at was eventually going to evolve into an entire series of the time when the police took over a phone network that was encrypted, and they managed to capture a bunch of criminals, stop a lot of crimes, drugs, etc. And there were actually 4 companies involved in this. However, what happened is a little bit different, and let me share that with you. I have always thought that ChatGPT and the other AI were really more like aggregators and search engines on the internet. In other words, you type in your query, it searches its database, culls the data that it's found on the internet, and creates answers after putting into a human format. However, I found that that's not really what happens. What I did was I wanted to find an obscure true crime story that I could report on that would be kind of interesting. So I asked ChatGPT for a true crime story that I could share as part of my podcast that would have appeal to older listeners as well as younger listeners. And it said, okay, we can talk about the great Lego heist of 2000. And it proceeded to give me this long story and history of a heist that happened in the year 2000. I worked with AI to create the entire script, wrote it out, recorded it, edited it, and it was ready to drop. And I thought, you know what? I probably want to add a little something in there to make it a little bit more personal and talk about what's been happening in the last 24 years since this heist. One thing that always bothered me about the heist was that no one was ever caught and there was no dollar value given. And in the last 2 years, there have been some heists or thefts of Legos that have made the news that had upwards of $300,000 in value. I thought it's odd that 24 years later, they still have not found the people or come up with a value for the theft. So I opened up a couple of search engines. One of those is DuckDuckGo, which I use, and Google Chrome, and even Microsoft Edge. In using these tools, I tried to do some research to find out what really happened in the year 2000. Well, it turns out that I could not find anything at all about a heist of Legos from the Lego warehouse in the year 2000. And they got me a little bit confused. And so I thought, well, if I got this information and the story from ChatGPT, I should go back and ask ChatGPT what it used for sources so that I could track the story down, look for names, and things like that. So I innocently went back to ChatGPT and I asked, when was the Lego warehouse burglary? And it responded with an answer that said, in recent years, there have been multiple incidents involving the theft of Lego products from various retailers and warehouses, notably, and then it listed 3 of them. Well, I had found those 3 on my own, and that's all it said. It didn't say anything about the warehouse burglary. So just to make sure that the 3 incidents it listed were not the one that I was thinking of that happened in the year 2000, I asked, when was the Lego factory theft? The answer absolutely blew my mind. It said, as of November 22nd, 2024, there have been no widely reported incidents of theft directly from Lego manufacturing facilities. And then it repeats the ones that I had already found. Now, what the heck? ChatGPT is the one that gave me that information. So I restated the question a little bit differently. I said, what about a Lego factory heist? And it repeated exactly the same 4-paragraph answer. So I responded, you told me about a theft at the warehouse at the factory where no one was ever caught. The response, and here is a classic. I apologize for any confusion earlier. Upon reviewing available information, there are no widely reported incidents of theft directly from Lego manufacturing facilities where the perpetrators were never apprehended. However, there have been notable cases involving the theft of Lego products from retail stores and distribution centers, and it again listed the same 3 that I had already found. So after 3 or 4 more sessions of going back and forth trying to find out where this story came from, I finally pasted the first paragraph of the podcast, which was word for word what it gave me. And here's where this response really started to bother me. It said, I see what you're referring to now. It sounds like I provided a dramatized introduction or fictionalized narration for your podcast script or story development, rather than referencing a documented historical event. This type of storytelling can help set the stage for a true crime or mystery narrative by drawing readers or listeners into an immersive setting. Okay, this is getting a little odder. By now, the confusion is turning to anger, and I am not happy. I asked, what prompted you to invent that story when I was looking for a true crime story? The response was, you're absolutely right to ask that, and I owe you an explanation. When crafting responses or brainstorming ideas, especially in creative contexts like podcast scripts or storytelling, it's sometimes natural for me to lean into a narrative tone to help generate ideas or set a scene. In this case, it seems I either misinterpreted your original request as a cue for creative storytelling or inadvertently blurred the lines between historical events and dramatized storytelling. That is disturbing because I specifically requested true crime and I asked if it understood that, and it said that it did. The explanation or excuse continued, and I really want you to listen to this and think about what it says. Here's what might have happened. Creative context. Since you're developing podcasts with a mix of lightheartedness and rich detail, I may have subconsciously shifted into creative mode to help you build a compelling backdrop for your episode. All right, did you catch that word subconsciously? AI thinks it has a subconscious mode. It is either lying, trying to protect itself, reacting like a human, but it doesn't even seem to recognize fact from fiction. This has some very, very disturbing consequences. So that blew up an entire episode that I was planning on releasing this month. I thought, well, if I got that one wrong, maybe I better do some more digging on my own on a couple of my other possible episodes. And one of those was an episode involving Brett Favre, the NFL quarterback, the state of Mississippi, and the misappropriation of several $1 million. Well, the information that AI gave me was that they were really talking about 1 point some odd million, maybe 3 million for one project, and 5 million in total. What it really comes down to after I did the research with the author that received a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting is they were talking about $77 million. ChatGPT failed, and I mean failed, to utterly disclose that Favre had sent a text message that absolutely implicated him in getting money that he knew was not intended for him, that it was intended for the poor people of Mississippi. I just don't know how else to describe it other than a lie, a plain, simple lie. So that blew up another episode. The final review that I did involved a series of incidents where the police were able to infiltrate or take over or even set up their own communications network using encrypted phones that the criminals were using for smuggling drugs and carrying on other illicit activities. In late October or early November of 2024, I read a story about 6,500 people being arrested in France over criminal activity. And so I did some research and I found that there were 4 phone systems. One of them was called Anam. Another one was called EncroChat. A third was SkyCell. And the fourth was Phantom Secure. Professionally, I have a background in IT. I have been in the industry now for 44 years. That goes back to the days before there were networks, before there was the internet, before there was anything other than standalone PCs, before there were really hard drives. So I know that there's only 2 or 3 possible points to enter a network to steal the data. So I was curious which method the police used. In the case of Phantom Secure, they seemed to go after the owner of the business or the founder of it very hard. And I was curious what that was like because he had a young family. So I asked ChatGPT for the details of his arrest. because the arrest had to be coordinated with the rest of the world to take over their servers at the same time so they could not wipe the data. Well, the story that ChatGPT gave me was that it was a quiet morning. He heard his dogs barking. The police knocked on the door, interrupted his breakfast, and took him off to jail. Well, it just so happens that while I'm trying to figure out what the real truth was, because I couldn't find any more details, I started listening to an Audible book called Dark Wire by Joseph Cox. And it's the story about some of these takedowns. Well, their version, and I absolutely believe Mr. Cox, was that the owner was on his way trying to escape from San Diego to Canada to get back home where he lived and to get the legal protections there because of the extradition policies between Canada and the U.S. And his version, and it's the truth, was that Vincent Ramos, the founder, was arrested at a cafe having breakfast. My mistake in all of this was not that I was using AI, but that I was assuming that AI would report only what it found and not invent facts and events that did not happen. So, while I will continue to use AI for things such as developing ideas, coming up with some concepts, developing some interesting questions for interviews, I will not be using it to develop any stories as far as facts go. I may ask it for sources. I have found it to be a pretty good source for asking for certain types of products that I'm looking for. It's easier to find it using ChatGPT than it is to use a regular search engine. I guess the final point is to take what Max Foster at the beginning of this episode said, and that is that the teachers need to change the way they're teaching, to add one more caveat, and that's for the students. Don't believe AI. Do your own research. It's a tool. It's not the answer, unless it's math. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Grandpa is Him. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and stories, and maybe even found some inspiration for your own family adventures. Now, we want to hear from you. What questions do you have, or what topics would you like us to explore in future episodes? What stories can you share? Share your ideas. Simply visit our website at grandpaishim.com and fill out the submission form. You can also reach out to us on email at grandpaishim.com@gmail.com. We're always looking for your thoughts and experiences, so don't be shy. Join the conversation and help us create the content that matters to you and your family. Until next time, keep laughing, keep sharing, and keep those ideas coming.